GM Danielson. The Time I Saw Stephen King at a Little League Game by N.S.Lewis. This is one of those memories that just comes flooding back. You've gone years and years not thinking about it at all, and then something triggers it, and boom, the floodgates open, and you're back there, watching it all happen again. In this case, my wife triggered the memory. She works at a small law firm up the coast a bit, and on Friday she came home and related an anecdote that her boss's wife Cheryl had told her. At the time, Cheryl was going to UMO, which is the main state college. I think this was the 70s or maybe the 80s. I don't remember if she was at the gym on campus or at a different one around town. Anyway, there she was, running on the treadmill, and Stephen King walked right up to her, raised his arms in the air and said, "Boogadaboo." Then he started shaking his face really fast and making weird noises. After that, he just walked off, leaving her bewildered and creeped out. I'm a big fan of Stephen King, as I imagine most people here are, so I got a pretty big kick out of the story. My wife sort of acted it all out for me, and I started picturing it in my head. And that's when it hit me. I was, I think, 11 years old. My dad was the Little League coach, and I was in the dugout, out of commission with a broken wrist. It was just as well, because I really sucked at baseball. Every time I was at bat, I'd swing for the fences and end up whiffing it about 98% of the time. I tried pitching one time and let up like 5 homers in 2 innings, and it was so bad that the old man had to pull me out. Anyway, it was between innings, and the guys came into the dugout, and one of them said, "Look, that's Stephen King in the bleachers." I looked over, and sure enough, there was Stephen King, sitting in an empty section of the bleachers. I knew who he was, so I thought it was cool, but I wasn't a fan then. I actually avoided horror altogether until I was in my mid-20s, and the reason I did so was because of Stephen King. When I was a kid, my older brother had a sleepover, and they watched It, the miniseries on TV, which was airing at the time. I heard them talking about how scary it was, with the giant spider and the evil clown and everything, and I got freaked out and stayed right away from horror for a long time. And by the way, I recently watched that version, and while it was neat, I can't imagine actually being scared by it unless you're a little kid. Back to the story. Everyone just kind of minded their own business and focused on the game, respectfully giving Mr. King plenty of space. I did wonder what the hell he was doing there. I lived in Belfast, Maine, and I knew that he lived in Bangor. Maybe he had a kid in Little League and was scoping out the competition for when the All-Star game started. I sadly never got close to making the All-Star team. Or maybe he was researching for a story or something like that. I knew he did a lot of stuff with kids as the main characters, so I didn't know why he was there, and I'd look at him every so often just to confirm. Yep, that's Stephen King. I was glad that I wasn't in the game, so somebody famous like him didn't see what would inevitably be a big swing and miss strikeout for me. Then I looked over one time, and he was gone. At some point, I had to take a whiz, so I headed back to the porta potties. That's when I saw Mr. King again, chowing down a hot dog at the concession stand. Cool, I thought. I saw Stephen King eat a hot dog. I did my business and headed back out to the dugout. When I got there, I looked around and it looked like everybody had frozen. Like everybody was there, but stopped in whatever position they were in when it had happened. Mark Sanderson, the Yankees pitcher, was in the middle of the wind-up. His dad was leaning forward on the bleachers, looking intent on the pitch. I shook my head and blinked my eyes hard. When I opened them, it was the same. Everyone was just frozen. My dad was there next to me, looking at his clipboard, also frozen. It was nuts. Then I saw somebody who wasn't frozen. Mr. King walked out onto the field. He was carrying a clipboard of his own. He stopped in front of Sammy Gildhart, our runner on second, and started looking him over, writing things down on his clipboard. I didn't know what the hell was going on and sort of settled into a corner of the dugout and watched. Mr. King lifted Sammy's batter's helmet up and knocked on his head. Then he replaced the helmet and jotted something down. He walked over to the Yankees' third baseman, a big bruiser named Greg Thompson. Mr. King walked in a slow circle around Greg and wrote at his clipboard for a while. What the hell is going on? I wondered. Then Mr. King pulled something from a pouch on his belt. It was one of those multi-tool things. He flipped it open to what looked like a serrated knife, and then started sawing Greg's head open. I let out a burst of puke and saw Mr. King's head turn slowly in my direction. I pretended to be frozen like everyone else. I prayed that he wouldn't notice the dribble of puke dripping down my chin. Mr. King turned back to his work, and I watched in shock and horror as he reached into the now opened up top of Greg's head. He pulled a bit of brain out like a noodle and slurped it up. He chewed it slowly, then made a note on his clipboard. When he was done with that, he replaced the top of Greg's head and moved on to Mike Grangeley, our man at bat. He cut open Mike's chest and had a bite of his heart. Again, he chewed slowly and thoughtfully, and again he made copious notes. Then he put Mike back together and started walking off the field. As he was passing by the dugout, he stopped. He turned and looked right at me. I was trying to stay still as I could, but I'm sure I was shaking in fear. I watched helplessly as Mr. King raised his arms in the air and started shaking them. "Boo-ga-da-boo," he said, and then started jiggling his face around, making snarling noises. I let out a yelp. I couldn't help it, and I couldn't help but reflexively covering my mouth. Mr. King winked at me and then walked off into the parking lot. When he got there next to his car, he snapped his fingers and the game suddenly resumed. Mark Sanderson released a fastball down the middle that went right past Matt Grangeley. Mark's father let out a whoop from the stands. So that was the time that I saw Stephen King. It was very weird, and I guess I sort of repressed the memory, though in the end everything was fine. Remembering that does answer the question that I've been wondering ever since I got into horror and started devouring King's work. How the hell does he do it? How does he create such vivid characters? Now I know, and so do you.